Claudette Colvin. When she was 15, she refused to move to the back of the bus and give up her seat to a white person. 9 months before, Rosa Parks did the very same thing. Most people know about Parks and the Montgomery, Alabama bus boycott that began in 1955. But few know that there were a number of women who refused to give up their seats on that same bus system. Most of the women were quietly fined, and no one heard much more. Colvin was the first to really change the law. Quote, "The bus was getting crowded, and I remember him, the bus driver, looking through the rearview mirror asking her to get up out of her seat, which she didn't," end quote, said a classmate at the time, Annie Larkins Price.
And when the bus driver called in the police, they accused you of resisting arrest as well as refusing to give up your seat. Can you talk about that and when the police came in to haul you off the bus?
One of the questions asked, why didn't you get up when the bus driver asked you and the policeman? I said I could not move because history had me glued to the seat.
She didn't say anything. She just continued looking out of the window. She decided on that day that she wasn't going to move, end quote. Other black passengers complied. Colvin ignored the driver. The driver walked back and asked her again. Quote, "I'd moved for white people before," end quote, Colvin says. But this time, she was thinking of the slavery fighters she had read about recently during Negro History Week in February. Quote, "The spirit of Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth was in me. I didn't get up," end quote. Colvin was born September 5th, 1939, and was adopted by C.P. Colvin and Mary Ann Colvin. Her father mowed lawns and her mother worked as maid. Claudette Colvin grew up in a poor black neighborhood of Montgomery, Alabama. In 1943, at the age of 4, she received her first impression on the struggles of segregation. She was at a retail store with her mother when a couple of white boys entered.
At a very early age, my first encounter was in a general store when a little white boy and a little white kid about my age and his friends, relatives, came into the store and they were laughing about me. And the little boy to another little child said, "Hold up your hands, let me see, let me see." And I held to my hands to his hand. And my mother gave me a backhand slap on the forehead.
In 1955, Colvin was a student at the segregated Booker T. Washington High School in the city. She relied on the city's buses to get to and from school because her parents did not own a car. She said that she aspired to be president one day. Colvin was a member of the NAACP Youth Council and had been actively learning about the civil rights movement in school. On March 2nd, 1955, she was returning from school, and in a Capitol Heights bus downtown, she sat down about 2 seats away from an emergency exit in the colored section. Growing up in one of Montgomery's poorer neighborhoods, Colvin studied hard at school. She earned mostly A's in her classes and even aspired to become president one day, as we already read. The convention of the time was that if the bus became so crowded that all the so-called white seats in front were filled and a white person was standing, any African Americans were supposed to get up from these seats, move to the back, and stand if there were no free seats.
Constitutional rights. Because I wasn't breaking the law under the state's law, separate but equal. I was sitting in the area that was reserved for black passengers. At that time, we didn't want to be called black because black had a negative connotation. We were called colors. So I was sitting in the color section. But because of Jim Crow law, the bus driver had police force. He could ask you to get up. And the problem was that the white woman that was standing near me, she wasn't an elderly white woman. She was a young white woman. She had a whole seat to sit down by opposite me in the opposite row, but she refused to sit down because of Jim Crow laws. A white person couldn't sit opposite a colored person. And a white person had to sit in front of you. The purpose was to make white people feel superior and colored people feel inferior.
I'm sorry, when a white woman who got on the bus was left standing, the bus driver, Robert W. Clear or Cleary, C-L-E-E-R-E, commanded Colvin and 3 other black women in her row to move to the back. The other 3 moved, but a pregnant woman, Ruth Hamilton, got on and sat next to Colvin. The driver looked at them in his mirror. Quote, "He asked us both to get up." Mrs. Colvin said she was not going to get up and that she had paid her fare and that she didn't feel like standing, end quote, recalls Colvin. Quote, "So I told him I was not going to get up either. So he said, 'If you're not going to get up, I will get the police,' end quote. The police arrived and convinced a black man sitting behind the 2 women to move so that Mrs. Hamilton could move back, but Colvin still refused. So like I said before, our history has been marginalized and have led black people to actually believe that for some reason that our struggles, the Black Power movement and the Civil Rights movement, were all because of certain individuals, when it was a community of people who were tired of the mistreatment. And keep in mind, men, black men, that our women started this. Keep that in mind, guys. Keep that in mind. One of them said to the driver in a very angry tone,
and then 2 squad car policemen come on the bus, and I became more defiant when they asked me the same question, and the gal, while you sitting there, I say, "It's my constitutional right. I pay my fare. It's my constitutional rights." And he said, "Constitutional rights," and then one kicked at me, and he knocked the books out of my hand, out of my lap. And then one grabbed one arm and one grabbed the other, and they manhandled me off the bus. And after I got in the squad car, they handcuffed me through the window and took me to booking, and then not to a juvenile facility, but to an adult jail. And I stayed in jail approximately 3 hours until my pastor, Reverend H.H. Johnson, and my mother came and bailed me.
The bus. One of them kicked me. I might have scratched one of them because I had long nails, but I sure didn't fight back. I kept screaming over and over, "It's my constitutional right." I wasn't shouting anything profane. I never swore, not then, not ever. I was shouting out my rights. Because, they tried to paint a picture that she was defiant, that she was cursing, and that she was fighting back. They actually tried to paint a negative picture of her. Now, keep that in mind, black people. When you are standing up for your rights and you are defending yourself, they will always put assault charges, disturbing the peace, or whatever they can do to try and justify their mistreatment of you. Because in their minds, you should just be compliant and obedient and do what they tell you. A second Montgomery teenager, Mary Louise Smith, was also arrested for refusing to give up her bus seat after Miss Colvin's arrest, but before Miss Parks, and she was also deemed an unsuitable symbol for the movement, partly because of rumors that her father had an alcohol problem. And again, we see this kind of thing.
Mary Louise Smith Ware, they said her father was a drunk, alcoholic, but Mary Louise Smith went to a private school, St. Jude. She graduated from St. Jude.
And she was? Who was she?
She was one of the plaintiffs. She was arrested in October.
And again, we see this kind of thing today when some injustice or anything of the sort happens to a black person. The first thing that seems to happen is they immediately try to discredit the black person. So as you can see, that this is nothing new in the black community. When an injustice has befallen you, The police, the law enforcement, the judicial system, whoever is conducting these investigations, always look to discredit you. They don't look at the merits of your claim. They look to discredit you so that your claim loses merit because of public opinion, right? It just killed me to leave the bus. I hated to give that white woman my seat. When so many black people were standing, I was crying hard. The cops put me in the back of a police car and shut the door. They stood outside and talked to each other for a minute. And then one came back and told me to stick my hands out the open window. He handcuffed me and then pulled the door open and jumped in the back seat with me. I put my knees together and crossed my hands over my lap and started praying. All ride long, they swore at me and ridiculed me. They took turns trying to guess my bra size. They called me a nigger bitch and cracked jokes about parts of my body. I recited the Lord's Prayer and the 23rd Psalm over and over in my head, trying to push back the fear. I assumed they were taking me to juvenile court because I was only 15. I was thinking, now I'm going to be picking cotton, since that's how they punish juveniles. They put you in a school out in the country where they made you do field work during the day. So again, the police mistreatment of black people is not new. It's not new to the 1990s. It's not new to the 21st century. Because what people need to realize is that the police department has been for a long time an outlet for racist, bigoted, prejudiced, biased, white supremacist, neo-Nazi white people to have power and lord it over black people. Because the police departments in this country were started for that very reason. Policemen were funded in this country for that very reason, to keep black people in check. Do the history. My videos on the history of a police breaks this down. And then look at how they berated this female. She was a 15-year-old girl and they berated her, talked down to her, but just being very misogynistic towards this female. But I'll continue on. And also another thing as well, for all of my black people out there who want to be thugs and think it's cool to, involve yourself in a prison life, think about this. In 1955 is not that long ago. People who were born in 1955 still exist on the planet to this day. So that should just let you know. Some of your parents were born in 1955, right? So in any event, they made them pick cotton because prison is slavery. Penitentiaries, jails are the new plantations. And the instant black people start to realize that and stay out of it, we will continue to be treated as such. We will continue to have the cops constantly harass us, come to our communities. We will continue to have people like Donald Trump giving out more contracts for private prisons to be built. Because they are housing facilities for slaves. They consider us slaves. Think about it. Read the Constitution. Even though the 14th, 15th, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were written for us, it doesn't specify anything black or about black people in the Constitution. So again, that should let you know further how they actually look at us. I'll continue on. Sorry for the long rant. Quote, my mom and dad got me out of jail. And my dad said, Claudette, you put us in a lot of danger, end quote, she recalls. He was worried about repercussions from the Ku Klux Klan, the KKK. So that night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the corner with his shotgun fully loaded all night. When Colvin went to school the following Monday, she got a mixed reaction. Some students were impressed by her courage, while others felt that she made things harder for them. Everything changed, she says. I lost most of my friends. Their parents had told them to stay away from me because they said I was crazy. I was an extremist. Now again, enter the coons. Mind you, 1955, the civil rights movement had already started. It was a very fledgling movement at that time. And the Rosa Parks incident, in fact, the incident with Colbert, which I'll get into in a little bit, was kind of one of the events that was kind of a catalyst for the civil rights movement to fully kick off. Rosa Parks' refusal to move out of her seat on the bus, pretty much, I guess you could say, was the last straw on the camel's back, so to speak. Now, look at the kids that she went, because you know those kids were just repeating what their parents had told them, and they were just parroting those same sentiments to this young lady when she went to school, right? Into the coons, because you should allow yourself to be mistreated. You're an extremist because you're a human and you want to be treated as a human. And to this day, we have coons who will stand up and defend a system that has segregated and disenfranchised them. They will stand up and fight against their own people and fight for a system that does not have their best interests at heart. Stay away from those people. We need to excommunicate those people out of our communities. But continuing on, Colvin was arrested on several charges, including violating the city's segregation laws. For several hours, she sat in jail, completely terrified. I was really afraid because you just didn't know what white people might do at that time, end quote. Colvin later said after her minister paid her bail, she went home where she and her family stayed up all night out of concern for possible retaliation. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, briefly considered using Colvin's case to challenge the segregation laws, but they decided against it because of her age. She also had become pregnant and they thought an unwed mother would attract too much negative attention in a public legal battle. However, she wasn't pregnant when the incident took place. She got pregnant.
Yes, I don't know, but they thought that I would not make a good test case. I know what was written in Taylor Branch's book, Part in the Waters, and what the attorneys had said, that later I became pregnant, but I was not pregnant on March the 2nd.
However, she actually did not become pregnant until later, like I just said. Words like feisty, mouthy, and emotional were used to describe her, while her older counterpart, Rosa Parks, was viewed as being calm, well-mannered, and studious. Because of the social norms of the time, in her youth, the NAACP leaders worried about using her to symbolize their boycott. Now, what I think is that, yes, Rosa Parks was older. She was a grown woman at the time. You know, she, more than likely, like a lot of the older people then, understood the system more and was probably a person who probably wasn't prone to making waves and approaching life with the same fire that a teenager would. Also, look at the contrast between Miss Colvin and Mrs. Parks. Miss Colvin is a dark-skinned sister. Rosa Parks was a very, very light-complected black woman. Very, very light-complected. More than likely, one of her parents or one of her grandparents was white. More than likely, because of the texture of her hair and her complexion. It doesn't make her any less of a black person, and that's not where I'm going. I'm just saying that they probably were able to appeal more to the empathy of white people because of Rosa Parks' appearance and her mild-mannered character, as opposed to a young, fiery, teenager, dark-skinned sister who wasn't going to keep her mouth shut, right? So, continuing on. Although Ms. Colvin quickly left Montgomery, she returned during the peak of the bus boycott that Mrs. Parks had subsequently sparked and testified in federal court in Browder versus Gale, the landmark case that effectively ended bus segregation. And I'm about to read a little bit into that as well. But again, take into account, Rosa Parks was not a part of that federal case. She wasn't part of that case. She did not testify in court. Right? So you can actually say Miss Colvin and the other sisters that testified with her were the force behind this whole segregation thing, having a new light shed on it. This is why history is so important. And also, again, to speak to history, this is what gave her the strength and the courage to actually stand up against a system that was designed to be against her, because she was learning about her history. Her teachers were teaching her students about Africa and, and what we come from, the royalty, the riches, that we come from, the lineage that we come from, the strong, intelligent people that we come from and that we are. That was empowering to her. Just like if history would, if we were learning about those things, if the kids were learning about those things in school now, would be empowering to them as well. To know that you come from a strong people who are literally some of the forces, the majority of the forces and minds behind civilization as a whole. That is a very empowering thing. To know that you are not a slave. To know that it isn't your purpose to be a slave or be subservient. History is empowering, which is why I'm a strong advocate for teaching history, especially to Black people. Continuing on. Together with Aurelia S. Browder, Susie McDaniel, Mary Louise Smith, and Jeanette Reese, Colvin was also one of the 5 plaintiffs in the court case of Browder versus Gale. Now, just real quick, Browder versus Gale. Anyway, I'll read that later. Sorry. The case, organized and filed by civil rights attorney Fred Gray, determined that bus segregation in Montgomery, Alabama was unconstitutional. Partly thanks to the degree of support being provided to the plaintiffs by the Black community, the country ultimately found itself with no option but to suspend its segregation policies and implement ones that were fairer. During the court case, Colvin described her arrest. I kept saying, he has no civil right. This is my constitutional right. You have no right to do this. And I just kept babbling things out, and I never stopped. That was worse than stealing, talking back to a white person. Other African Americans had previously refused to give their seats to white passengers, says Holmes. Quote, what was without precedent, though, is Colvin wanted to get a lawyer and she wanted to fight, end quote, he said. The lawyer she chose was Fred Gray, one of 2 African American lawyers in Montgomery at the time. After speaking with Colvin, Gray said he was prepared to file a civil rights lawsuit to contest segregation on buses in Montgomery. But after discussing Colvin's incident with other local African American community leaders, the community decided to wait, he says. Colvin was just 15 and did not have civil rights training. Gray says the community was not quite prepared for Colvin's situation. Later, I had a child born out of wedlock. I became pregnant when I was 16, Colvin says. And I didn't fit the image either of, someone they would want to show off. 9 months later, Rosa Parks did the exact same thing as Colvin. She was 42 years old, a professional, and an officer in the NAACP. Holmes says Parks was the symbol that civil rights leaders were looking for. I knew why they chose Rosa, Colvin says. They thought I would be too militant for them. They wanted someone mild and genteel like Rosa. Gray, who went on to represent civil rights icons Parks and the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., says that Colvin is one of the thousands of unnamed individuals who played a key role in civil rights history. Which, again, is another important thing. Why do you guys think about it? There would be no need for a push for civil rights if thousands and thousands upon thousands of Black people weren't A, being mistreated, and B, fighting back. Because the fact that people were standing up for themselves is what gave people the courage to even fight for them in the first place. Because people were tired of being mistreated. If Black people had just rolled over and just let it happen, there probably would not have ever been a civil rights movement. But the people made the movement necessary, not certain individuals. I'm not trying to diminish Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. at all and what he has done and accomplished for black people, but we have to stop, we have to stop putting all of our struggles on the backs of just one individual. It's up to all of us to stand up and fight for what is right, for what is just. We have to stop looking for leaders and deitizing people when they do have the guts to stand up and fight for us. They're fighting for us because they have our voices and our support backing them. That's why they have, a lot of them exhibit fearlessness or courage in the face of these dangers, because we're supporting each other in these struggles. The reason why we don't have the same leadership now is because who's supporting them? Yet, instead of being celebrated, Ms. Colvin has lived unheralded in the Bronx for decades, initially cast off by black leaders who feared she was not the right face for their battle, according to a new book that has plucked her from obscurity. Quote, young people think Rosa Parks just sat down on a bus and ended segregation, but that wasn't the case at all. End quote. Ms. Colvin said in an animated interview at a diner near her apartment in the Parkchester section of the Bronx, maybe by telling my story, something I was afraid to do for a long time, kids will have a better understanding about what the civil rights movement was about. Although Ms. Colvin quickly left Montgomery, she returned during the peak of the bus boycott that Mrs. Parks had subsequently sparked and testified in federal court in Browder versus Gale, the landmark case that effectively ended bus segregation. Ms. Colvin relies on a cane to steady herself. Retired in 2004 after 35 years as a nurse's aide at a Manhattan nursing home. She contributed to her own obscurity. After settling in New York, she never talked about how her arrest helped prompt the famous bus boycott.
The resolution that read will be received and adopted. Are you ready for the question? All in favor, let it be known by standing on your feet. Started a bus protest which literally electrified the nation. And that was a day when we decided that we were not going to take segregated buses any longer. And you know, when we planned the bus boycott, we said if we could just get about 50 or 60% of the Negroes of Montgomery not to ride buses, this would be an effective boycott. I think that whole day we found 8 Negroes on the buses. And from that day on, that boycott was more than 99 and 9/10% effective.